Some of the most popular medical procedures of the past are almost laughable now. For instance, trepanation. That was a procedure where they drilled a hole in a person's skull to let the demons out so that it would relieve headaches. Cigarette companies once advertised their products as healthy. It was a healthy option for stress relief. Originally, heroin was actually marketed as a non-addictive substitute for morphine, and it could be used to treat coughs, back pain, and insomnia. Methamphetamine was originally sold as a miracle weight loss drug, but both methamphetamine and heroin, their marketing campaigns were eventually canceled when studies revealed that they were more potent and more addictive than the drugs they were intended to replace. In each of these cases, new information proved some of the medical community's foregone conclusions, their preconceived notions, were actually harmful rather than helpful. If you could put it this way, the facts forced a reality check on the physicians. Has it ever occurred to you that you might be out of touch with reality? Is it possible that you're sitting here this morning and you need a reality check? One way to answer that question is by asking another question. Do my beliefs and my behaviors mesh? Do my lips say one thing while my life says another? Specifically, is it possible that I believe in the resurrection but still live in the shadow of death? The theme of Mark's gospel is that Jesus is the Son of God who makes disciples. Mark develops this theme in 3 stages throughout his writing. First, he follows Jesus through Galilee, where Jesus, the Son of God, makes disciples with the multitude. Second, he observes Jesus, the Son of God, making disciples as he travels to Jerusalem with his disciples. Finally, he points to Jerusalem, where Jesus, the Son of God, makes disciples of the whole world. The final chapter of Mark's gospel reveals the resurrected Christ. He is risen. He's risen indeed. He is made well. He is made whole. He's commissioning the 12 to make disciples of others just as he's made disciples of them. However, before they are ready to be sent, they needed to see him alive. They needed to know that the resurrection was indeed true. I want to show you this morning that encountering him after his resurrection changed the way they thought about everything else. My main point is really simple this morning. The reality of Jesus' resurrection should change our perceptions. The reality that Jesus is alive should change the way we think and act regarding everything else. One might ask, why should the reality of Jesus' resurrection change our perceptions? Well, the reality of Jesus' resurrection should change our perception because of the following reasons. Number one, the reality of the resurrection should change our perceptions because priorities are changed. Look with me at Mark chapter 16, verse 1. Now, when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices that they might come and anoint him. Very early in the morning on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. I want you to imagine this trio of women. They are unaware that Jesus is alive. They're coming to the tomb to anoint the decaying body of their Lord. The Jews didn't embalm a body like we would. Instead, they encased it in aloes and in myrrh, different spices, intense perfumes to help mask the stench of decay. This was on Friday evening when Jesus died. Of course, the Sabbath began at 6 p.m. on Friday evening, so they weren't allowed to follow through with this ritual. Sabbath law required a complete cessation of unnecessary activity until the Sabbath ended at 6 p.m. on Saturday evening. The new day, Sunday, would have started at sunset on Saturday evening, so after the Sabbath restrictions were fulfilled, markets would reopen, business would resume. It seems, according to verse 1, that these 3 women went to the marketplace late on Saturday evening. They weren't browsing, they weren't shopping. They went with a very specific, very intentional list. By the time their purchases were completed, but by the time the preparations were made and the spices were mixed, darkness had overtaken the landscape. For both practical and protective reasons, they chose to wait until morning to go and finish their mission. Their priorities, however, were completely misplaced. It would seem honorable that they would go and anoint the body of Jesus, but the problem is Jesus had told them that he would rise and his body would not be there. They left home early in the morning to anoint a body that wouldn't even be there when they arrived. Now, the body of Jesus had already been prepared for burial before it was laid in the tomb. John records that Joseph of Arimathea had asked Pilate for the body. When Pilate gave him the body, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, the same one that came to Jesus by night, they took the body down, they took it and they wrapped it in linen cloths. But before they wrapped it in linen cloths, they encased it in over 100 pounds of myrrh and aloes. If Joseph and Nicodemus had already anointed the body, you've got to ask, why was it necessary for this trio of women to anoint the body again? Now, many commentators have suggested it was because Joseph and Nicodemus had rushed the process going into the Sabbath evening. And I think this is possible, but the use of 100 pounds of myrrh and aloes certainly doesn't sound like the ritual had been rushed or only partially completed. I don't think these three women were going to the tomb because they didn't think the men did a sufficient job. I think it's more plausible that they are going to the tomb just to be near the body of Jesus one more time. This seems to me to be best interpreted as an act of love and devotion. It would take real love, it would take real devotion to go into a tomb where the body has already began to decay, to just endure the stench of that. What's certain, I don't know their exact reason for going, but what is certain is that these three women had watched Jesus die, and they did not expect him to rise again. All three women were present, according to Mark chapter 15, 40 and 47. All three women were present at the crucifixion. They were present at the burial. They heard Jesus' last words, and they did not expect to ever hear his voice again. Their main priority now was just to make sure his body was treated with the dignity they thought it deserved. Their main priority now was just to be with him one last time. And it all seems so noble, but if they had known, if they had recognized that he was already alive, they would not have wasted so much time and so much energy prioritizing things that, though noble, were not necessary. A failure to recognize the resurrection always results in misplaced priorities. If Jesus is alive, then our calling is no longer to encase a dead body. Our calling is to exalt a living Savior. The reality of the resurrection must cause a reality check in relation to what we perceive as priority in life. I once had a secretary who was overwhelmed by the weight of her responsibilities. Her desk was covered in mountains of paper. She was keeping all these detailed financial and church records. The problem was she didn't need to anymore because we had purchased an electronic system that could keep up with all of those records far better than she could. She came in my office one day and she looked like she was on the verge of pulling her hair out. She said she just couldn't handle it anymore. She couldn't take all of this responsibility. She couldn't keep up with the new system and the old system. The problem was she didn't realize that the new system had made the old obsolete. She came in there and she told me if something didn't change, she was going to quit. She just couldn't handle the pressure anymore. I looked at her and gently I told her that things already had changed. The reality was she didn't need to quit her job. She just needed to quit doing things that weren't necessary. She needed to quit taking records by hand when we had a computer system to do that. If we are not careful, we will give our attention to things that are noble, but just not necessary. The reality of Jesus' resurrection changes our priority. It's essential that we ask ourselves this morning, am I prioritizing things of this world or the next? For instance, am I more focused on eternal things or am I more focused on temporary things? Are you more focused this morning on your children's success or your children's salvation? Are you investing in your retirement accounts without considering any potential for eternal dividends? Are you giving your energy to making dead bodies smell better? Or are you pursuing a risen Savior? The first reason that the resurrection has to change our perceptions is because priorities are changed. The second reason that the resurrection must change our perceptions is because problems are solved. Look with me at Mark 16, verse 3. They said among themselves, "Who will roll away the stone from the door of the tomb for us?" But when they looked up, they saw the stone had been rolled away, for it was very large. As these three women were walking, one question was dogging their steps. Who's going to move the stone? In fact, the Greek wording here, the verb is in the imperfect tense, so they are asking this question over and over on their way to the tomb. Who's going to roll away the stone? The stone was a massive round rock. It was chiseled to fit into a sloping groove. Once the rock was placed in the groove and rolled over the door of the tomb, it would seal the tomb, and the rock was so heavy, so massive, that it would have taken several men to roll that stone that rolled down so easily. It would take several men to roll that stone back up the track. These women have been walking, and according to the text, they looked up. That tells us their eyes have been downcast from most of the distance from the dwelling to the garden. They've been looking at the ground. Their hearts are heavy with grief, and their eyes are following their hearts. Yet as they get closer to the tomb, you can imagine that one of them looks up and maybe shakes the others, and the others look up and they find that the tomb is already open. The stone's been moved. When Mark tells us that they saw it, it implies more than they just noticed it. The Greek word here communicates the idea they're looking closely at this. They're rubbing their eyes with a sense of wonder. They're unnerved. They're unprepared by what they saw. The problem in front of them, the problem that they were anticipating, had already been answered. They didn't know it yet, but an angel had moved the stone. Matthew recounts, and behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat on it. You see, though they were unaware, God had already answered their question before they even asked it. Sometime before daylight, Jesus had walked out of the tomb. The angel had not descended to let him out. The angel had opened the grave to let them in. They had to see he was not there. He's risen. The obstacle that the stone caused was transformed into an opportunity to behold an empty tomb and anticipate a risen Lord. All the way there, they were wondering who's going to move the stone, and they were wondering who's going to move a stone that God had already moved. The resurrection addresses every problem we face in life to varying degrees. It assures us that every issue has an ultimate solution. The women discovered that because of the resurrection, the problem that they thought was in front of them was actually already behind them. The resurrection performed a reality check. It proved that their problems were not as significant or insurmountable as they thought. My 3-year-old boy likes to pull an old old gorilla cart around our yard. There's a root in the backyard that's about 2 or 3 inches high. When he was little, he wasn't quite strong enough to pull that cart over that root. Now that he's older, he's got the strength to do it, but because he once couldn't do it, he's convinced he'll never be able to do it. And every time he gets to that root, he hollers, "Daddy, come help me." The reality is he treats a pebble like a boulder because though his circumstances have changed, his perception hasn't. The resurrection has changed our reality. It's turned our mountains into molehills. It's been proven that the things that are too big for us are small to him. Though it was once an insurmountable mountain in our way, even death has become nothing more than a pebble on our way. Death is now a door to let us in rather than a door to keep us out. And this truth isn't limited to death. The resurrection ensures every problem we face has a solution. They will be solved, whether in this world or the next. What we once viewed as an obstacle should now be viewed as an opportunity for the glory of God. There's a third reason that the resurrection should change our perceptions. Number 3, that's because panic is unnecessary. Look at verse 5 of Mark 16. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man clothed in white robes sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He's risen. He's not here. See the place where they laid him." The women were surprised and somewhat bewildered by the open tomb, and they approached carefully to look inside. But when they looked inside, they didn't find a dead body. They found a living angel. Just like anyone in their right mind would have at this point, these women began to wonder, have I lost my mind? The appearance of this angel alone was enough to cause a normal, strong man to collapse in fear and dread. These women here, they're confronted with two conundrums. There's a missing body and there's a living angel. These dreadful realities terrified these women, and it caused them to literally begin to tremble, to begin to shake in fear because they don't know what's going on. This angel, though, sensed their confusion, and he assured them there's no reason to be afraid. If I can paraphrase what he said, "Stop being alarmed. It's unnecessary. I know you're looking for Jesus who was crucified, but you won't find him here. You can see his body's not here. That's because he's risen from the dead. Your panic is entirely unnecessary." Though Mark calls the messenger a youth, he never expressly calls him an angel. Luke affirms the narrative. He adds more detail when he writes that they walked in and they found this angel. They found two angels actually in shining garments like lightning in the tomb. They're dazzling. They're brilliant beyond description. Though Luke focuses on two angels, Mark only focuses in on one of the angels, and that's the one sitting at the right hand. Now, this is not the kind of detail that someone making up a story would have included. Luke also affirms the angel's response to the women, and he said, the angel said to the women, "Remember how he spoke to you when he was still in Galilee, saying the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified and rise again the third day." The angel said, "Don't you remember? He told you this would happen. He told you the tomb would be empty." The angel reminded them that Jesus had told them exactly what would happen. He had been laid down, but he would soon stand again. The angel looks at them and he basically tells them there is no need to panic. Everything's working precisely according to plan. Entering that tomb and seeing that was to assure them that things were not out of control. Things were under control. Jesus' resurrection had proved that he had already conquered the things they were afraid of. Entering the valley of the shadow of death remains one of man's greatest anxieties, but Jesus' resurrection proves that it is only a temporary place. It's not a final destination. You see, the resurrection reorients us to the reality that there is nothing for the believer to fear. Even death has lost its grip. Even death has been left. That cold hand of death has been left shivering in the shadow of the sun. The resurrection allows us to taunt death the way it used to taunt us. "Oh, death, where is your sting? Oh, grave, where's your victory?" In Revelation chapter 19, verse 19, the Bible tells us that the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gather to make war against the Son of God and against his people. What's interesting about that text is, though it seems that man will be gathering to destroy the people of God, the reality is that God will be gathering his enemies into the winepress of his wrath. What would appear to be a reason to panic will actually be a reason to rejoice. You see, just like God will gather his enemies on that day, when we look into this empty tomb, these women would have looked in and they would have thought, "What's going on here? What's wrong here?" They began to panic. The angel says this isn't a reason to panic. This is a reason to praise. The resurrection proves there's no need to panic, no matter how dreadful things appear. When it appears that everything's falling apart, the resurrection proves that it's really just falling in place. There's a fourth and final reason that the resurrection should change our perception, and that's this. Number four, because people must know. Look again at Mark chapter 16, verse 7. The angel said to the women, "Go tell his disciples and Peter that he's going before you into Galilee. There you will see him as he said to you." So they went out quickly and fled from the tomb, for they trembled and were amazed. And they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. The angel told the women, "Don't be afraid. Instead, go tell the men, especially Peter, the one who's denied him. Go tell them that he will meet them in the appointed place where he told them he would." This whole scene overcame the women. They were left in dumbstruck silence. The sun was well up by this point. Jerusalem was beginning to stir. The streets were filling with the sounds of animal hooves and cartwheels. People were opening shops and the streets were getting crowded. But these three women, instead of stopping to speak to anyone on their way home, they ran home in complete silence because they weren't yet sure what to make of everything they'd heard. If what they had experienced, if what they had just seen was true, everyone needed to know, but their lips were still quivering too violently to speak. They had a message to be shared. Jesus was alive, and they wouldn't be able to keep it quiet for long. When the shock wore off, they would be all too excited to try to hide it. The message that the women was given by the angel shouldn't have been surprising, because Jesus told them at the Last Supper that the shepherd would be struck and the sheep would be scattered. But he said again, I'm going to rise again. And when I rise again, Mark 14:26 through 28, he says, I will go before you to Galilee. Jesus had already told the disciples to meet him at an appointed place in Galilee after his resurrection. But due to their grief and unbelief, they were still sitting in Jerusalem when they should have already been on their way to Galilee. The angel shared the good news with the women, who in turn were instructed to share it with the men. Jesus is alive. Gentlemen, 12, you men, why are you sitting here in Jerusalem? You should be on your way to Galilee. Jesus is alive. The reality of the resurrection must change our perceptions, because there are people who still don't know that Jesus is alive. How can we keep this matter to ourselves while others are still living in the shadow of death? Jesus' resurrection forces a reality check on what are we doing with the news. Unlike the disciples, Jesus did not tell us to meet him in Galilee. He's told us to take the good news to the ends of the earth. If the resurrection really happened, the world has to know. The Battle of New Orleans was fought on January 8, 1815. It was one of the bloodiest battles of the War of 1812. The British suffered great losses. 291 men were killed, 1,262 were wounded, and 484 were declared missing. The Americans lost 39 were wounded, 19 were missing or captured. The greatest tragedy of this battle is that the Treaty of Ghent had been signed on December 24th, 1814. In that battle, many were injured, many lives were lost, all for a war that was already over, because the news had not yet arrived that things had changed. If Christ is risen, the world must know lives are being lost while we are keeping silent. Again, the reality of the resurrection should change our perceptions. The fact that Jesus is alive has direct implications on the way we live and on the way we die. His resurrection from the dead has to change our priorities in life. His resurrection from the dead assures us that the rocks that we can't roll are just pebbles to him. There is no problem we face that he's not already solved. His resurrection from the dead serves as a constant reminder there's no reason to panic. Even the shadow of death is just a reminder there's light on the other side. His resurrection from the dead is such monumental news that we can't keep it quiet. Our perceptions that no one wants to hear it are all wrong. You never know, they may be looking for some good news too. The resurrection challenges our natural ways of thinking and acting. It proves that there is a power at work in us greater than the powers that are at work against us. And I challenge you this morning, as you go about your routine this week, ask yourself, does my life look like I believe he's alive? If not, I invite you to reorder your priorities to reflect the reality of the resurrection. When you find your eyes downcast this week, I beg you to lift your head and see the stone has been rolled away. Remind yourself that your anxieties already have answers. When you find yourself afraid of the events unfolding around you, stop and look to Christ in you. He is not dead and left in a tomb. He's alive and living in you. When you see someone else who seems to be living in the shadow of death, share the good news that Jesus is alive and invite them to step into the light. The resurrection changes everything, but the change must affect our attitudes if it is ever to make any real difference in our actions. The reality of Jesus' resurrection should change our perceptions. Will you pray with me?